Antiquity Unveiled, the most marvelous revelations of the 19th century concerning the origin of Christianity by Jonathan Manning Roberts. Notwithstanding the power of the Church over the people, religious thought and unfoldment are compelled to move onward as the rays of light from the torch of knowledge dissipate in the darkness of ignorance. Could that be why this is on the Luciferian list? This light may come through the medium of science or through the mediums employed by those in the spirit spheres to enlighten the children of men, causing them to cast their mythical gods aside and accept the truth. Remember, myth is a story. It does not mean it's not true. It means that it has meaning and purpose and use. And even the Bible uses this way of employing the term mythos. Even when the creeds and dogmas of the churches are proved untrue, it yields only when it encounters some antagonist superior to itself. It may be science, or a revelation from the spirit world, or the giant public opinion, the outcome of advanced thought, or the combined effort of them all. When the electric light of truth is turned on, the Christian creeds, dogmas, and teachings shrink away and disappear, or are revised by the prelates of the church. Many of the more courageous of the clergy in these times of rapid progress are repudiating some of the old dogmas which but a short time ago were held as sacred truths, but now crumbling in the light of the 19th century. And in the 1800s, it still made sense. Preachers were still calling for the death penalty for adultery and stuff like this. Not only was it far less common, it was, it seemed like something that made sense as the legal punishment. And now that most people do it, and it's not even, and a huge chunk of people aren't even getting married ever, it's not that the offense has reduced itself any of what it is. The proliferation of disease has certainly increased the cost rewards, and the statutory laws have again added to the potential risks in terms of this life. But the legal punishment has dropped from being what it is. I was a member of a church that they called for the death penalty for a first act of adultery back in the 1800s. But as American law changed, they changed. And that's how you know that these people aren't as firm in their values, that they're changing the laws and how their church runs based on these laws and claiming, right and wrong based on that. That they don't believe in the supposed revelation or inspiration that directed their church, right? Now they can say, we're not going to act out these things. The Catholic Church says, if they bring back the death penalty for child molestation, the Catholic Church is going to be supportive of it and help with that. But they don't think life in prison is a viable alternative for some of what used to be death penalty crimes, according to the Catholic Church. It may be science or a revelation for the spirit world or a giant public opinion, that the outcome of advanced thought or the combined effect of them all. When the electric light of truth is turned on, the Christian creeds, dogmas, and teachings shrink away and disappear, or are revised by the prelates of the church. And I don't know, I think of this more as the Buddhist thing. There's creeds that exist, you're trying out, you're seeing what works, but the light turns on and you realize. And that's a huge reason why the next book in our series should probably be this one. It's an old enough book. I slightly damaged the corner. Not really noticeable, but other than me. But many of the more courageous of the clergy in these times of rapid progress are repudiating some of the old dogmas which but a short time ago were held as secret truths, but now, crumbling in the light of the 19th century, they seem to catch the spirit of one in the olden time, who is said to have exclaimed under the similar circumstances, "If I hold my peace, the very stones would cry out. Give me that old-time religion, give me that old-time religion, give me that old-time religion, it's good enough for me." Well, I wouldn't say the conservative movement or to regress in terms of technology, but, you know. It has been the policy of the Christian Church since it undertook the management of man's religious affairs to cut off all knowledge of spirit intercourse between the two worlds as it existed in the centuries before the Christian era. The church authorities did not overlook the importance of this spirit intercourse, discussion, not the other thing. Hence, they retained it within their own prescribed circle and still continue it through mediumistic channels, disguising it under the title of communion of saints, that they may more easily maintain their power over their subjects. Succeeding in this, all their energies were bent upon holding them to be forms and ceremonies connected with the worship of mythical creatures. Not only this, but the teachings of the heathen mythology, in a modified form, have brought forward and stamped with the insignia of the potentates of the church, and made to appear as a direct inspiration from the divine mind. And do I have the Gnostic? Is the Gnostic Mass in here? I don't remember how exactly it plays out in the Catholic Church, but in the Gnostic Mass, they list out people and make a scratch, but it doesn't mean that they're Christians or something. But the communion of the saints is basically the listing and the identifying with these things. In the heart of man. E-O, E-O, E-O. For example, in the Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica of Aleister Crowley, a branch of, is it the OTO or the AA, or does it actually link to both of those? We worthily commemorate them, worthy that did of old adore adore thee and manifest the glory unto men. Lao Tse, Siddhartha, and Krishna, and Tahuti, and Moshe, and Dionysus, and Muhammad, and Tomegatherion, with these also, Hermes, Pan, Priapus, Osiris, Melchizedek, Chem, Amun, Mentu, Herodes, Orpheus, Odysseus, with Vencelius, Catullus, Martialis, Rabelais, Swinburne, and many other holy bard, Apollonius, Tianus, Simon Magus, Manus, Pythagoras, Basilides, Valentinus, Barcidendus, Hippolytus, that transmitted the light of Gnosis to us, and their errors with Merlin, Arthur, Emret, Percival, and many another prophet, priest, and king that bore the lance and cut the sword and disc against the heathen, and these also, Carlos Magnus and his paladins, William the Skyran, Frederick of Hohenstaufen, Roger Bacon, Jacob Brigidas Valensis, the martyr, Christian Rosenkreutz, Ulrich von Hutten, Paracelsus, I may get to that book this year, Michael Mayer, Roderick Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, Joe Boheme, Francis Bacon, Lord Verulam, Andrea Robertus de Fluctibus, Johann D., Sir Edward Kelly, Thomas Vaughan, Elias Ashmole, Valenzis, Anna Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, Wolfgang von Goethe, Ludwicus Reck Varavede, Richard Wagner, Alphonse Louis Constant, Friedrich Nietzsche, Hargrave Jennings, Karl Kellner, Furlong Dukes, Sir Richard Payne Knight, Paul Gauguin, Sir Richard Francis Burton, Dr. Gaurand Macause, Dr. Theodore Roos, and Sir Aleister Crowley. And, obviously the list is different with the Catholics because they don't acknowledge that certain figures that might be called gods in olden times because of their deeds or something. Succeeding in this, all their energies were bent on holding them to forms and ceremonies connected with the worship of mythical characters. Not only this, but the teachings of the heathen mythology in a modified form have been brought forward and stamped with the insignia of the potentates of the Church, and made to appear as a direct inspiration from the divine mind. It is an outrage upon humanity that these spirit prophets and sages of old have combined to overthrow, thereby establishing the universal liberty and a highway of progress unobstructed by the power of a time-serving and self-constituted priesthood. They entered into the great work with an earnestness and determination which betokens success to the cause of rescuing humanity from the dark condition to which it has been led. Mankind has a natural tendency to multiply religious rites and ceremonies such as excite fear and imagination. It naturally dreads the unknown and unfathomable future. In these traits, priestcraft finds its opportunity. Therefore, every means is employed to encourage them. Let us glance for a moment over the world and behold the evils which have followed the nations that have blindly accepted the teachings invented by priestcraft. Different from a priesthood by itself, but ha-kahanim, the enemies according to the Bible. The clergy have framed, which became the leaders of Judaism and Christianity. The clergy have framed the church machinery in ancient as well as modern times, which, as it turns, causes the people to move around in the treadmill of religious forms and ceremonies. Through these, they are made slaves to the priesthood, abject slaves where the ignorance prevails, and mental slaves even amongst the intelligent classes. Now, that type of priesthood, the Kahin, is an access controller, and soothsaying is very commonly a part of such things. That's why we have oracles. Now, oracles, free association, but when you try to say, well, the dice rolled this way, so therefore this is the divine giving this specific message, that is something different. Through these, they are made slaves to the priesthood, abject slaves, where ignorance prevails, and mental slaves, even among the most intelligent classes. They think of the tortures of the juggernaut, as in India, as well as tortures of various other kinds of other countries to appease the vengeance of an angry God, the cruel sacrifices of the Crusaders and massacre on St. Bartholomew's Day, the tortures of the Inquisition of Calvin and the martyrs. On every hand is found the trial of priestly persecution, the human mind enslaved. And this, I am not worthy unless this group says that I'm worthy. Don't fall into that trap. That's not what I'm saying. That religion and priesthood shouldn't be leading you down that thing. Priestcraft has been the curse of the world. In its path, happy nations are buried, and the face of nature drenched in the blood and tears of innocent people. All this on the basis of the fiendish maxim, the end justifies the means. But why enlarge further here upon the terrible picture? History abounds with the details of this painful thing. The reason it does not affect the public mind more at present, is because time gently covers human folly with its mantle. Hence, as the centuries roll by, what occurred in the past affects only as a troubled dream. Why is Christianity so revered by the people of today? Certainly not because they realize that its teachings are true, as they are accepted without question. The answer is because it has been clothed with an apparel entirely foreign to its true character. A false sacredness has been thrown around its mythological teachings by the priestcraft. The symbolic, the sympathy and imagination of the devotee have been drawn upon by depicting the sufferings of an innocent victim who in reality never existed. Or if you believe what the Bible says about this before the Pauline part, that nobody ever suffered for anybody else's crime or sin in terms of justice. This is not something that happens. So you can't, no one else can vicariously atone for you with God. You have to at least go up and touch the sacrifice, put some money in the pot to help pay for the sacrifice. Until they have become an actuality in the mind. But Christianity was stripped of this superficial covering, now made attractive by all the embellishments that intellect and eloquence can devise. It would present an image which would at once be recognized as a relic of heathen mythology. From generation to generation and century to century, we have been taught to ignore reason and accept blindly the absurd doctrines that even the religious teachers themselves cannot explain. Fortunately, however, they are being explained in this generation from a source and in a manner that cannot be refuted. Why do we find the masses more intelligent today than in former centuries? Surely not by reason of this legacy of heathenism. Education is the primary factor in the production of this marked change. To illustrate, we refer our readers to those countries where Christianity has predominated for centuries without education, or with only such as would not interfere with its man-made religion. That doesn't mean there's not a current of spiritual truth behind it, and we certainly have to find something better. If we're not going to be Christian, we certainly got to find something better, because nothing is certainly proving to be worse, isn't it? They will find that in the proportion the church power has been absolute, ignorance, misery, and bloodshed has prevailed. Now we find with secularism, it multiplies. All that stuff multiplies. So they will find, in that proportion, the church powers then glance over our own country with its free school system, free institutions and government, with entire separation of church and state, so-called, right? And whence Christianity rests on its merits, with no compulsory power to enforce submission to its dictates as of old, and the marked results will be seen for the better. Christianity and the church have followed the march of civilization instead of leading it, while the ministry have hugged their precious delusions to their hearts and forced, as far as possible, the religious teachings upon the people. Notwithstanding these potent facts, the clergy claim and would have us believe that all real progress and civilization itself is a product of Christianity. Now, when we talk about religion, sometimes some words go before the word in one language, or we're not talking about one person who's claiming to be a founder. So we got to look about, okay, what's being said about here? The priestly and ministerial forces of the Christian church, by enforcing its heathen doctrines, place themselves squarely across the line of progress, and with an assumed authority, command the people to obey their religious mandates. In doing this, they're required to ignore reason, the soul's true guide. The New Testament writers made clear that philosophy was forbidden. Oh, Paul could philosophize, but anybody else using Epicurean, Aristotelian, Socratic, Platonic, Epicurean, or hedonism. I guess there's slightly a difference between the two, but it's really the same thing. Um, Regarding the flesh and regarding the consequences, same thing. The soul's true guide. As well might the mariner cast his compass into the sea and expect to arrive safely in port. The law of evolution, holding good in the mental as well as the physical, man should progress in his religious as well as in all other natural faculties. Uh, the improvement of humanity as civilization goes on isn't really appearing to be a mental or physical thing. We're getting smaller and weaker and less able to deal with things, and probably not as smart. But evolution just means we're the survivors, right? We're the ones who survive. As generations go on, it's going to be the poisons that humanity has put upon itself that are going to be what people end up surviving, and people who do better and reproduce better because of being able to handle the damage that we're doing to ourselves better. Perhaps there'll be some people that aren't product of the sickness, but we'll see how it goes, right? In view of this, it was not only nature, but in the line of evolution, that he should have entertained crude religious ideas and worshipped the sun and stars before he could conceive of higher objects of devotion. In the past, men of superior minds and spiritual attainments were also worshipped as gods, or as being teachers sent from God. While teachers sent from God, they weren't worshipped as such, but when they were treated as gods and intercessors or demigods or whatever you call them, treated as gods, in other words. For men intuitively reveres and worships that which is above or superior to him. The greater error of the present time is committed in attempting to confine the progressive tendency of religious evolution within the prescribed limits of this crude religious theories of the past. Now, hypotheses maybe, but there, I guess if you say the Bible's the evidence and you're trying to develop your doctrines based on picking up a Bible, then I guess you could call that theorizing. Thus, foisting upon the more progressive and enlightened nations of the earth the effete ideas gathered from the primeval religions. The religions of today are nothing more than a modified form of the systems of idolatry and religious ceremonies that prevailed when the race was in its infancy, the human race. These barren religious ideas portrayed the wanderings of the human mind while battling up through the Dark Ages when the intellect was struggling for supremacy over the animal and man. Now, we've advanced in technology, and we now have a time where we can have an international religion that would be preserved, or has been preserved, as some would say, and there's reasons to believe that. But the requirements of such can't favor. You can say that a text was originally in a language, but all the meanings would be available in the top languages of the age. And the smaller languages, maybe it can't be as some languages it can't be as clearly translated, but all the meaning is there. We can't be left with a quarter of the words in tonic not having working translation. How can we, how can we say that this is what God has sanctioned for us? How can there be conflicts in terms of the New Testament script? 10,000 variants. And I'm not just talking like dialect. I'm talking like actual word differences, whole chapters and verse, or at least verses inserted, parts of verses, words. It's not just mere transcription errors. It's very intentional, a lot of it, and even transcription errors. But we can't favor, like Islam, for example, does not teach that there is a superior language. It doesn't teach that there's a superior race. It doesn't teach that Arab ways are better than anybody else's ways. It's about principles. And every faith that even comes remote has got to strip this blood and soil character completely, or any other sort of ethnocentrism. The religions of today are not. Okay, these barren religious ideas portrayed the wanderings of the human mind while battling up through the Dark Ages, when the intellect was struggling for supremacy over the animal and man. I think we have more of a problem. Maybe it got better for a little bit there in the 1800s, but I think it's gotten much worse, hasn't it? We're worse than the beast. Most of humanity is. But the light keeps spreading, so there's hope. But the density of it's not. Startling evidence of the consciousness necessary. The conscious necessity of religious evolution was made manifest by one of the leading exponents of Christianity in a lecture January 1892, the tone of which is so near in accord with the views herein expressed that we feel constrained to make the following quotations from his remarkable utterances. Evolution has given us a new philosophy, a new biology, a new sociology, a new astronomy, and a new geology. Is he talking about Marxism? Or Marxism isn't invented yet, but social Darwinism is not quite the same. It will not finish its work until it has given us a new theology. The time has come for all religious teachers to recognize the doctrine of evolution. Theology must apply the law of evolution to spiritual as well as to material phenomena. It has been said that Christianity is unchanging. I hold that it is a progressive and changeful religion, and that its creeds should be better in the 19th than in the 16th century. The force which we call Christianity, well, but is it? In the 21st century, I would say no. The force which you call Christianity is a force resident in humanity. Only the application of the law of evolution to the problem of religion will ever solve them. Christianity is a civilized paganism. Of course, paganism having nothing to do with religion. The Romans referred to the people that followed the same religion as, whether you lived in the city or not, whatever faith you followed. If you lived in the country in pegs and heaths, you were pagan or heathen. That's just how it went. It had nothing to do with religious identity, and will always remain until the paganism in men's nature is eradicated. We find much paganism in Christianity, with its creeds, practices, and ceremonies. If we are Christian evolutionists, we shall not go back to the Westminster Confession, or to the 39 Articles, or to the Nicene Creed, or to Peter's Confession, or to any creed of the New Testament. We shall not go back to the 4th century for our ideas of the church of the future. We shall not be surprised to find errors and imperfections in the Bible. Because the Bible is a collection of books, right? Truth is not in a book. Truth is in the heart and in the mind, and the book only communicates it from one mind to another. Evolution and redemption are only two words for the same thing. Or in other words, redemption is evolution in the spiritual realm. The people may indeed take courage when the prominent teachers of Christianity not only admit the possibility, but the necessity of religious evolution. The dawn of light must be near to those who have remained so long under the shadow of modified paganism. In contemplation of this vast subject, within the religious mists of ages dissipated, and Antiquity Unveiled, before us, the mind is shocked as the theological mysteries and fraudulent proceedings of the promoters of Christianity are exposed. Their mysteries and false religion have hung over mankind as a dark pall for many centuries. When we realize what a stupendous system of deception has been practiced upon the unsuspecting generations of the past, we start back in astonishment. When these crimes against humanity were set in motion by a few selfish, ambitious minds, they could not have realized what gigantic proportions their creation would assume in the following centuries. It may occur to the reader, in view of these late unfoldments, what an unfortunate position the Church is placed in by its great efforts to proselyte and convert the heathen to the very creeds and dogmas which are plagiarized from the religions of their ancestors many centuries ago. Can we wonder at their indignation when the Christian missionaries go among them, or that they treat them with cruelty and when they persist in forcing upon them these doctrines? Now, a lot of people early on, particularly in the time where you had as much as 1,500 years of Scottish-Irish rule over non-Christian majorities, but I guess it's time to take a pause here in the final few pages of this section. But people saw, oh, it's basically the same religion. So a lot of people who converted, it was like, we're not really changing much of anything, are we? So, and you're going to, saints are worshipped, and you're going to turn what we worshipped into a saint? Yeah, okay. But some people weren't buying it for a long time, but eventually it's like, it's the same consciousness being expressed. So we need to go beyond this fanaticism of looking at these figures and worshiping them and turning them, or somehow regarding them as a god or treating them as a god. We got to look at these things and say, oh, yeah, this guy Jesus, he had some good ideas, and he had some ways that people could follow. And over ritualizing Zarathustra didn't like this, and what did they bring back? All the ritual drug use and the giant rituals and stuff like this. Reciting scriptures, saying simple prayers. That was what he was doing. What he was revealed or inspired to say could be, enacted. But it wasn't that you go through processes that take months just to dedicate a fire and you have to take this many steps for your fingernails and all sorts of other things crept in. And the evidence is that they did creep in. You did have things justified because kings wanted it. The statecraft and priestcraft has, even when a religion remains, you find things different. I mean, how many so-called Islamic leaders are going to say to kill people the Quran says to leave alone? The vast majority aren't going to these extremes, but a lot of them are, and it's because, the Christians do it, and the law hasn't changed. Or, some tyrant ruler way back then, or maybe just someone made a mistake, and people like to repeat the mistake. Someone had some religious questions that weren't understood by the ruler in the land, and he had the guy beaten, and the guy was so steadfast that after that guy was no longer caliph, that he asked the question to other people and got an answer.